Most days, Daniel Carter's penthouse felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was spotless, silent, and untouched by life. His 9-year-old son, Lucas, hadn't spoken or moved much in years. The doctors had stopped offering solutions. Hope had quietly slipped away. But everything shifted one ordinary morning. Daniel came home earlier than expected and saw something he couldn't explain. Their housekeeper, Maria, was dancing with Lucas. And for the first time in years, his boy was actually watching. What started as a simple moment, a waltz on polished marble floors, sparked something Daniel thought he'd never see again, a connection. It unraveled years of silence, grief, and numbness. Because healing, he would learn, doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from movement. That morning had begun like any other. The staff followed their routines with mechanical precision. Greetings were short and polite, footsteps quiet, hands efficient. Daniel Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Innovations, had left just after 7 for a board meeting, pausing only to glance at the untouched breakfast tray outside Lucas's room. The boy hadn't eaten again. He never did. Lucas, aged 9, hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years. A car accident that took his mother's life left him paralyzed from the waist down. But what haunted Daniel more than the wheelchair or the silence was the emptiness in his son's eyes. There was no grief, no anger, just a hollow vacancy. Daniel had thrown millions into therapies, neuroprograms, even high-tech simulations. Nothing worked. Lucas sat in the same chair, by the same window, every day. He barely blinked. The therapist said he had closed himself off. Daniel thought of it differently. Lucas was locked in a room Daniel couldn't enter, no matter how much money he spent, no matter how much love he tried to pour into it. That day, Daniel's meeting was cancelled at the last minute. An overseas partner had missed his flight. With 2 unexpected hours, Daniel decided to head home, not because he wanted to, but because habit drove him there. He figured there was always something to manage, something to fix. The elevator carried him to the penthouse. As the doors opened, his mind ticked through business tasks, until something caught him off guard. Music. Soft, faint, unpolished, nothing from the sound system. It was real, human. He froze, then walked carefully down the hall. With every step, the melody grew clearer. A waltz. Gentle, steady. And then came something even more impossible, movement. Not the swish of a vacuum or the clink of dishes. Something alive. Something like dancing. And then he saw it. Maria. She was barefoot on the marble, spinning slowly, gracefully. The morning sun striped across the floor like it wanted to dance with her too. In her hand, held as if it were the most fragile thing in the world, was Lucas's. His small fingers curled loosely around hers as she guided his arm through a soft arc, like he was leading her. Her movements weren't dramatic. They were quiet, instinctive, tender. But what froze Daniel in place wasn't her. It wasn't even the dancing. It was Lucas. His son. His unreachable boy. Lucas's head tilted up, his eyes locked on Maria. He was following her every move. Focused. Present. Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't seen his son look at anyone like that in years. Not even during the most advanced therapies. Yet here he was, tracking Maria's dance like it mattered. Daniel stood there far longer than he realized. When the song faded, Maria turned toward him. She didn't look shocked. Her face was calm, as if she'd known this moment would come. She lowered Lucas's arm gently, easing him back, almost like waking someone from a dream. Lucas didn't shut down. His gaze just dropped to the floor, naturally, like any child who had simply played too long. Maria gave Daniel a small nod. No guilt, no apology, just acknowledgement. Daniel tried to speak, but no words came. She gathered her cleaning cloths, humming quietly, as if the dance had never happened. Daniel stood frozen, shaken. His mind raced. Was this a violation? A breakthrough? Did Maria know therapy? Who allowed her to touch his son? But none of those questions held any weight compared to the truth he had just witnessed. Lucas had been alive in that moment. Present. Connected. He walked over to Lucas's chair, half expecting the boy to return to his usual blank state. But he didn't. Lucas stayed still, but not empty. His hand twitched, his arm held the slightest trace of tension, like the muscle remembered it was there. And then, softer than a whisper, Daniel heard something that made his chest collapse. A hum. The faintest melody. Off-key. Fragile. But undeniably real. Lucas was humming. That night, Daniel didn't drink. He didn't answer emails. He sat in the dark, replaying the scene in his mind. He had walked into his home expecting silence. Instead, he had found a waltz. The next day, he summoned Maria to his office. He had expected anger, but what filled him instead was control, a need to understand. Maria entered calmly, her chin lifted, not defiant but ready. Daniel's voice was cold. "Explain yourself." "I was dancing," she answered simply. "With my son," he pressed. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I saw something in him," she said. "A spark. I played a song, and his fingers twitched. He followed the rhythm, so I followed him." Daniel's control cracked. "You're not a therapist. You're not trained. You don't touch my son." Her answer was immediate. "No one else touches him either. Not with joy. Not with care. I didn't force him. I followed him." Daniel paced. He snapped about protocols, about costs, about specialists. Maria stayed steady. "They don't see what I saw today," she told him. He chose. He looked. He wanted it. For the first time in years. Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. "You crossed a line," he said. She nodded once. "Maybe. But I would do it again. Because for a minute, he was alive." Daniel nearly fired her. But he didn't. Because in her words was the one truth he couldn't ignore. His son had been alive again. That night, Daniel found himself remembering something he hadn't let himself feel in years. His wife, Lily, dancing barefoot in their kitchen with a toddler Lucas in her arms. The three of them laughing. Music filling the air. A life before loss. A life before silence. He swayed slightly in his chair, not dancing, not still. Later, he checked on Lucas. His son sat by the window as usual. But there was something different. Daniel leaned in. Lucas's lips moved faintly. A shaky hum. The same melody Maria had played. Daniel stood frozen, afraid to breathe. His boy was humming. Alive. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was staring at a ghost. He was looking at a child. His child. And for the first time in years he dared to think of the word he had buried so deep. Hope. And that tiny spark of hope, fragile as it was, began to change everything. Maria was allowed back into the penthouse, though only under strict conditions. Daniel made the rules clear the very moment she walked in again. "Cleaning only," he said without looking at her, his voice flat and measured. "No music. No dancing. Just clean." Maria didn't argue. She simply nodded, picked up her mop and broom, and moved about the rooms with her quiet, steady grace. There were no confrontations, no drawn-out lectures, just an unspoken understanding that something sacred had happened between her and Lucas. And now it needed to be handled like glass, fragile and easily broken. Daniel told himself his rules were about protecting Lucas. That pushing too far might undo whatever spark had been lit. But deep down, he knew he was protecting something else, himself. He wasn't ready to admit that Maria had touched a corner of their world no therapy, no machine, no doctor ever had. From the hallway, Daniel began to watch her work. Maria didn't talk to Lucas. She never even acknowledged him outright. Instead, she hummed softly as she swept. The tunes were unfamiliar, old, rooted, almost ancestral. Not nursery songs, not anything classical. They carried the weight of something remembered, not written. At first, Lucas was as still as always. His chair faced the window. His eyes gave nothing away. Maria didn't look for miracles, though. She just kept moving with a rhythm that wasn't planned, but deeply intentional. Sometimes she changed her humming mid-verse, letting it dip or flutter, filling the air with small shifts. Even from the hall, Daniel could feel it, the way the room itself seemed to lean toward her. Then one afternoon, something happened. Something so subtle most people would have missed it. Maria swept past Lucas, her tunes sliding briefly into a minor note. And Lucas's eyes followed. Just for a second. But Daniel saw it. Maria didn't react. She didn't stop. She didn't make it obvious. She just kept humming, steady as ever. The next day, it happened again. This time Lucas's eyes stayed on her a moment longer. Then a few days later, when Maria turned, he blinked twice, slowly, purposefully. A conversation without words was starting to form. Daniel watched every day, arms crossed behind the wall. At first, he told himself it was research, observation, proof. But over time, he realized it wasn't suspicion keeping him there, it was hope. He no longer wanted Maria to stop. He was silently willing her to continue. Maria never coaxed Lucas. She never begged for responses. She just created space, a steady rhythm, an invitation for him to step into if he chose. No charts. No clipboards. No agenda. Just presence. Once, she tapped a wooden spoon gently against her bucket. The sound was barely a beat, but Daniel swore he saw Lucas's foot twitch. Just once. Then stillness again. They weren't miracles in the traditional sense, but they were proof that connection wasn't a switch you flipped, but soil you nurtured. Daniel wanted to tell the physical therapist. He wanted to explain the eye movements, the twitching foot, the silent conversation. But how could he? They'd dismiss it as coincidence, unverifiable, anecdotal. And maybe it was. Still, he couldn't unsee it. Maria treated those moments like seeds. She didn't push them. She trusted something unseen was growing underneath. Every evening, she packed her supplies, gave Daniel a brief nod if their paths crossed, and disappeared into the elevator as though she hadn't just shifted the air in the entire house. Her humility drove Daniel mad, and yet it humbled him too. On the 6th day, Maria finished her chores without fanfare. Lucas had tracked her movements 3 separate times. And once, though Daniel could hardly believe his eyes, his son's cheek twitched upward. A half smile. Barely there, but real. Maria noticed, but she didn't say a word. That was her gift. She let moments breathe and then pass, never turning them into spectacle. As she packed up her things, Maria walked to the table near Daniel's chair. She paused, pulled a folded napkin from her pocket, and placed it gently on the surface. She glanced once toward the hallway. She knew he was watching. Then she left. When the penthouse fell silent again, Daniel stepped into the room. On the napkin was a pencil drawing, childlike, uneven, smudged. 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, their arms curved in mid-spin. His chest tightened. He didn't need to ask who drew it. Lucas. His son who hadn't drawn anything in 3 years. His son who hadn't initiated communication in so long. And now, here it was, his memory on paper. Not a request. Not a cry for help. But an offering. He sat for a long time, holding the napkin, letting it speak in the silence. That evening, as the sun sank and shadows stretched across the penthouse floor, the napkin remained right where Maria had left it. Proof that Lucas was slowly, quietly learning to move again. The next therapy session began like all the rest. Rigid. Structured. Hope drained out of routine. Lucas sat in his wheelchair across from his speech therapist, a kind woman who had been coming for over a year. She spoke gently, used flashcards, repeated affirmations, and waited. She was competent. She was patient. She was ineffective. Daniel stood on the other side of the glass partition, arms folded. He'd long ago stopped expecting anything new. Carla, their nurse, sat nearby taking notes, her eyes lingering on Lucas as if sheer willpower could draw him out. Then the elevator chimed. Maria stepped inside. Quiet, unhurried. She carried a scarf in her hands, soft, colorful, worn with years of meaning. She didn't speak at first. She waited at the threshold until the therapist noticed her. No objections came. Maria nodded once at Carla, then moved toward Lucas. She didn't kneel. She didn't touch him. She simply let the scarf dangle and sway, like a pendulum. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Want to try again? It wasn't coaxing. It wasn't pressure. It was an invitation. The room went still, holding its breath. The therapist hesitated, unsure whether to step in. Carla froze, her eyes darting between Maria and Daniel, as if waiting for someone to draw a line. But then Lucas blinked. Once. Then again. 2 slow, deliberate blinks. His version of yes. The therapist gasped softly. Daniel's hand slipped from his mouth, and the sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He turned away from the glass, unable to be seen in that vulnerable moment, his throat tight with something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a response, it was understanding. His son had recognized the question. He had chosen to answer. Maria didn't celebrate. She didn't cry out or cheer. Instead, she smiled, not at Lucas, but with him. She began to loop the scarf around her fingers, turning it into a simple game. Wrapping. Unraveling. Letting the ends flutter in the air. Each time, she let the scarf graze just beyond Lucas's hand, pausing to see if he'd reach. At first, nothing. Then a twitch. Not a reflex. A choice. He didn't grab the scarf, but he acknowledged it. Maria let him set the pace. Always his pace. The therapist slowly backed up, realizing the session was no longer hers. Maria wasn't running therapy. She was speaking a different language, one only she and Lucas seemed to understand. Each moment wasn't forced. It was earned, built on trust and patience. Behind the glass, Daniel stood frozen, every muscle tense. For years, he had thrown money at specialists, hired the best of the best, desperate for someone to break through. And here was Maria, with no degree, no credentials, holding nothing but a scarf, and coaxing a yes out of the boy everyone else had stopped believing in. It wasn't dramatic. But it was revolutionary. A quiet rebellion against despair. When the session ended, Maria tucked the scarf back into her bag. No theatrics. No proud glances. She left the room without even looking Daniel's way. He didn't follow. He couldn't. For a man who made decisions that shaped entire industries, he had never felt more powerless, or more shaken, than in the wake of what he had just seen. Later, Maria went back to her work, dusting frames, folding linens, tidying rooms as though nothing miraculous had just taken place. For her, maybe it was as natural as breathing. That night, long after the staff had gone and the penthouse had gone still, Maria returned to her cart. Nestled between a spray bottle and folded rags was a note. No envelope, no signature. Just 4 words typed in simple font. Thank you? D.G. She read it twice, then again. There was no demand, no warning. Only gratitude. Fragile. Honest. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into her pocket. But not everyone shared Daniel's quiet relief. The next day in the laundry room, Carla approached her with folded towels in her arms and worry written across her face. You're playing a dangerous game, she said softly. Maria didn't answer right away. Carla went on. He's waking up. And it's beautiful, but this family's been bleeding for years. If you stir too much, you'll be blamed for the pain that comes with healing. Maria turned toward her, calm and steady. I know what I'm doing, she said gently. I'm not trying to fix him. I'm just giving him room to feel. Carla hesitated. Her voice softened. Just be careful. You're healing things you didn't break. Maria placed a hand on Carla's arm. That's exactly why I'm here. That night, Maria sat alone in the small cleaning closet, holding the scarf in her hands. It had belonged to her mother once, still carrying the faint scent of lavender and thyme. She didn't need it for her job, but she kept it close. A reminder that softness could cut through stone. That sometimes the world's most unqualified soul was the one who carried the medicine broken hearts really needed. She had seen Lucas blink. She had seen the spark. And even though Daniel had said nothing beyond those 4 typed words, she felt it, the wall around him shifting, just enough to let a little light in. The next morning, Maria returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. She hummed as she worked, a little louder this time. Nobody stopped her. The glass door where Daniel usually stood was open now, no barrier between them. It happened quickly, and yet it stretched into forever. Maria knelt beside Lucas's chair, adjusting a ribbon they'd been using for a coordination exercise. Daniel leaned in the doorway, arms folded, not to hide anymore, but as if holding himself together. Lucas's hands moved more freely than before, his gestures small but stronger, steadier. Maria never pushed him further than he could go. She always let him lead. Then it happened. As Maria gathered the ribbon, Lucas's lips parted. Not in a yawn. Not in a cough. With intention. Maria! The word was rough, cracked, almost broken. But it was there. His first spoken word in 3 years. Maria froze. Her breath caught, her hands trembling. Maria! He said it again, softer, barely audible, but real. Her name. Daniel stumbled forward, shock slamming into him like a wave. He dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair, his voice shaking. Lucas, say it again. Please, son. Say Dad? Can you say Dad? His hands cupped his son's face, desperate. But Lucas's eyes slid away, a small flinch as though retreating. He looked toward Maria again, then down, falling back into his quiet shell. The light dimmed, just like that. Daniel's chest cracked. He'd reached too hard, too fast. He could feel the moment slipping back into stillness. Maria placed a hand on his arm, anchoring him. Her voice was quiet, but firm. You're trying to fix, she said, her gaze locked on Lucas. He doesn't need fixing. He just needs you to feel. Daniel blinked at her, stunned by the clarity in her words. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a lecture. It was truth. An invitation to stop repairing and start being. Lucas's eyes lowered, but his fingers twitched, a small reminder that he hadn't fully shut down. Not yet. Daniel's voice cracked. You gave him a reason to speak. Not me. Maria looked at him, her face unreadable. He spoke because he felt safe. Not seen. Safe. Daniel nodded slowly, though understanding it was harder than ignoring it. His voice dropped to a whisper. But why you? Maria paused. Because I didn't need him to prove anything. The rest of the day passed quietly. Maria worked as if nothing monumental had happened, though her hands shook as she poured the mop water out. Daniel lingered longer in Lucas's room than he ever had before, just sitting there, saying nothing. Not asking. Just being. That night, when the penthouse was finally still, Daniel walked into his bedroom and pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a photograph, the edges curled and faded. He and Lily, laughing, dancing barefoot in their living room the night they found out Lucas was coming. He turned the photo over. Her handwriting was on the back. A little smudged, but clear. Teach him to dance. Even when I'm gone. Daniel sat down on the bed, the photo trembling in his hands. He had forgotten those words, or maybe buried them because they hurt too much. For years, he had been trying to rebuild Lucas with machines, doctors, and protocols. But never once had he tried to teach him how to dance. He hadn't believed it was possible. Not until now. Not until her. Not until Maria. Lucas had spoken a word. And not just any word. Her name. It broke something open inside Maria when she heard it. The way Lucas's lips stumbled over the syllables, the way the sound cracked like a voice unused for years, the way it clung to something fragile but alive, hope. It shattered her. She didn't cry then. Not in front of Lucas, not in front of anyone. She saved it for later, in the quiet stairwell, where no one could see her fall apart. Not because she was sad, but because the miracle of it was too much to hold. He had reached for her. Spoken to her. She had touched a part of him no one else could. That night, as she gathered her things, Maria didn't linger. She didn't pause at the window to take in the city lights like she usually did. She simply nodded to Carla in the kitchen, offered the security guard a faint smile at the elevator, and disappeared into the night, Lucas's voice still echoing in her chest. Just one word. Her name. And somewhere deep inside the penthouse, Daniel sat alone in the dark. A photo in his hands. A memory in his mind. A promise he had once made, and the first fragile hint that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to feel again. The storage room had been ignored for years, touched only when staff pulled out seasonal decorations or stored away files Daniel insisted on keeping. No one sorted through it with intention. But that morning Maria did. Not out of duty. Out of instinct. Something pulled her there. Maybe it was the photos she had noticed on Daniel's desk. Maybe it was the way Lucas now followed her with his eyes, sometimes even turning his head ever so slightly. The house was shifting. And Maria, once just the cleaner, had become something else entirely, the quiet keeper of its healing. As she moved a stack of boxes labeled Lily, Keep, an antique cabinet gave a groan. A drawer she hadn't known was there slid open. Inside was nothing but dust and a single sealed envelope, its edges yellowed with time. Across the front, in delicate, unmistakably feminine handwriting, were the words. To Daniel Grant. Only if he forgets how to feel. Maria froze. Her chest tightened. She didn't open it. She wouldn't. But she held it for a long moment before leaving the room, the weight of it pressing against her palm like a heartbeat. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hand it off to a supervisor. She waited. Until the house was quiet, until Lucas was asleep and Carla had retreated to the kitchen for tea. Daniel sat alone in his office, eyes scanning the same page of a document he hadn't absorbed in half an hour. Maria stepped into the doorway, the envelope in both hands. She didn't speak until he looked up. I found something, she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow, bracing himself for some trivial matter. But when he saw the envelope, his face changed instantly. He knew that handwriting. His breath caught. Where? His voice was hollow. In storage. Behind a drawer marked personal, Maria said. It's sealed. His fingers shook as he took it. For a long moment he couldn't move. Finally, he broke the seal. Maria started to step back, to leave him with his privacy, but his voice stopped her. Stay. She stood quietly in the room as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned once, then again, his expression unraveling with every line. She wrote this 3 days before the crash, he whispered. His voice faltered. Then, slowly, he began to read aloud. If you're reading this, it means you've forgotten how to feel. Or maybe you've buried it too deep. Daniel, don't try to fix him. He doesn't need solutions. He needs someone who believes he's still in there. Even if he never walks again, even if he never speaks again, just believe in who he was, who he still is. His hands trembled. His voice cracked as he read the next line. Maybe someone will reach him when I'm gone. I hope they do. I hope you let them. Daniel couldn't go on. He folded the letter halfway and bent forward, his shoulders shaking. The tears came hard, unguarded, like a flood breaking through a dam. He wept not with control, not with restraint, but with the raw grief he had locked away for years. Maria said nothing. She didn't try to soothe him with words. She stepped closer and placed her hand gently on his shoulder, not as a worker, not even as a friend, but as another human being who understood what it was to carry pain that wasn't yours. Wave after wave left him hollowed out, stripped of pride, stripped of the armor he had carried too long. And in the wreckage, what remained was something softer. Something human. When at last his breathing slowed, he lifted his face, eyes swollen and red. He tried to speak, but nothing came. Maria shook her head gently. "You don't have to," she said softly. "She wrote it for a reason." Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood. Some things didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be acknowledged. He picked the letter up again, his lips moving over the final line. Barely a whisper. "Teach him to dance, even when I'm gone." Maria exhaled, her own chest tightening. She'd heard Carla say those words once, as if they were prophecy. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and his voice was hoarse. "She would have liked you." Maria didn't hesitate. Her reply was quiet, but certain. "I think she already does." It didn't need explanation. It was a truth that stretched beyond reason. Daniel folded the letter one final time and set it in the middle of his desk. Not hidden. Not stored away. Seen. And in that moment, nothing came from therapy or doctors or even Lucas himself. Just a letter from the past, and the woman who had placed it in his hands. That was the night Daniel finally broke, not from failure, not from fear, but from release. Maria stood beside him, the silent witness, handing him not just his grief, but his future. As she turned to leave, Daniel whispered again, to no one in particular. "She would have liked you." Maria smiled softly, her back to him. "I think she already does." The next day, Maria introduced the ribbon. She didn't explain its purpose, didn't announce it. It was long, pale yellow, faded with time. She told Lucas gently, "This is just for us. No pressure. Let the ribbon do the work." She looped one end around his hand, one around hers, and moved slowly, teaching him to follow motion with motion. Not with legs, not with force, just with his arms. At first, it was barely anything. A tilt of the wrist. A soft bend of the elbow. But Maria marked each millimeter like a celebration. "There," she whispered. "That's it, Lucas. That's dancing." He blinked in rhythm, his way of saying yes. From the doorway, Daniel watched. More often now. His arms weren't crossed anymore. His shoulders weren't so rigid. He didn't watch Maria with suspicion, but with reverence. She was teaching Lucas something he could never have taught himself: how to move again, not just with the body, but with the soul. One afternoon, she added a second ribbon. Lucas anticipated her motions now. Sometimes he lifted an arm before she touched it, trying to meet her halfway. "You're not following anymore," Maria told him with a smile. "You're leading." And though he didn't fully smile back, his lips twitched. For her, it was enough. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. The ribbon, the music, the familiar routine, and then it happened. Lucas didn't just move his arms. His torso shifted. His hips swayed. His feet slid across the mat, just an inch. Maria froze. "Not in fear, but in awe," she whispered. "You're moving." He looked down at his feet, then tried again. A tiny shift of weight. One side to the other. Enough to call it dancing. Daniel walked in at that moment. He stopped cold, watching his son sway side to side. Maria kept the ribbon steady, guiding but not leading. Daniel's heart seized. His mind wanted to explain it away: reflex, muscle memory, chance. But his heart knew the truth. This wasn't science. This was Lucas. After years of stillness, his son was dancing. And inside Daniel, the locked door finally cracked. The grief that had sealed it shut began to give way. Maria lifted the second ribbon, offering it out to him. Without a word, Daniel stepped forward, kicked off his shoes, and took hold. For the first time since Lily's death, Daniel Grant joined the rhythm. It wasn't perfect. His movements were stiff at first, awkward. But Lucas didn't resist. He let his father in. The ribbon bound them together. A rhythm of sways, small and imperfect, but real. For once, Daniel didn't think about outcomes or progress. He only felt the weight of his son's body under his hand. The courage in each movement. and for the first time in years, something inside him softened. Not joy. Not yet. But hope. And hope was enough to move. Maria stepped back, giving the moment to them. No one spoke. The music played on. And for once, the silence in the house wasn't emptiness. It was communion. When the song ended, Daniel let go of the ribbon. He knelt in front of Lucas, his hands resting firmly on his son's knees. And he waited for Lucas to meet his gaze. "Thank you," Daniel said softly, his voice low and breaking apart. Lucas didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His eyes carried everything his father had been desperate to see for years. Maria finally stepped forward and placed the ribbon gently in Lucas's lap, curling his small fingers around it. She didn't add a word. Not because she had nothing to say, but because what had just happened didn't need to be explained. It was real. It had lived. And for Daniel Grant, the man who had once locked every emotion behind walls of rules, systems, and silence, that room, the one he'd kept sealed for so long, finally opened. Not all the way, but wide enough to let music and life slip back in. Wide enough to let his son in. Wide enough to let himself in, too. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, Daniel found Maria folding towels in the laundry room. Her sleeves were rolled, her face calm as always. But something in his voice made her pause mid-fold. "I want you to stay," he said. She looked up, uncertain what he meant. "Not just as the cleaner," he added quickly. "Not even just as what you've become to Lucas. I mean, stay. Permanently. As part of this." There was no pitch in his words. No polished speech. Just truth, spoken without armor. Maria stared down at the towel for a long moment, then set it aside. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to answer now," Daniel said, shaking his head. "I just need you to know that this place feels different when you're here. Alive. And not just for him. For me, too." Maria's lips parted as though she might speak, but she closed them again. Her voice was quiet when she finally answered. "There's something I need to understand first. Before I can say yes." Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet," she said softly. "But I will." That night, the penthouse hosted its annual charity gala 2 floors down in the ballroom. What had once been a spectacle under his father's hand, Daniel had reduced into something smaller, more dignified. Maria had no intention of going, she didn't belong to that world. But Carla urged her. "Take a break," Carla insisted. "Even 10 minutes. It's for the children." Then she smiled faintly. "And you qualify now." Maria finally relented. She slipped into a simple navy dress and kept to the back with the catering staff, content to observe from the edges. For a while, the evening unfolded uneventfully. Until a donor revealed a new commemorative display. A black and white photograph, enlarged and framed, from the early 1980s. It showed Daniel's father, Harold Grant, shaking hands with a young woman. She was slender, dark-skinned, with thick curls and striking cheekbones. Maria's heart stopped. Her face went pale as she stepped closer, her mouth dry. She read the small plaque, Harold Grant, 1983, Education Initiative, Brazil. Her mother had been there. She had spoken of those years, of a man with pale blue eyes. Maria stared at the photograph, trembling. It wasn't her mother. But it looked exactly like her. The image stayed with her long after she slipped away from the ballroom and returned upstairs. She told no one, not Carla, not Daniel. But her hands shook as she folded laundry that night. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed at the gala, shaking hands, nodding at donors, pretending to care about wine and pairings and tax breaks. When he came back hours later, Maria had already gone to her room. But she couldn't sleep. The photograph burned inside her. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. She remembered the silences when she asked about her father. The stories cut short. The cryptic comments about a man with power, a man who had once been kind but distant. And now, the pieces weren't just fitting, they were snapping into place. The next evening, while Daniel was checking in on Lucas, Maria slipped into Harold Grant's old study. No one used it anymore. No one cleaned it unless asked. She searched with care, not chaos. She moved books, opened drawers, sifted through files. It took nearly an hour before she found it. An envelope, plain, tucked behind a row of encyclopedias at the very back of a shelf. Its edges yellowed. The handwriting across the front neat and careful. For my other daughter. Maria's breath caught. Her throat tightened as she held it. She didn't open it at first. She just stared, as if reading it would break something inside her that could never be repaired. Finally, with trembling hands, she tore it open. Inside were 2 papers. A letter. And a birth certificate. Her vision blurred as she read the name, Maria Miles. Father, Harold James Grant. The letter was short, written in the same careful script as the envelope. If you ever find this, I hope the timing is right. I hope your mother told you enough to find your way to this house. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to know you. I hope you found what you needed without me. But if you're here, then maybe something beautiful happened anyway. Maria stood frozen, her chest hollow and full at once. She didn't confront Daniel immediately. It wasn't betrayal, wasn't revelation, it was gravity. The slow pull of truth finally landing. Later that night, she appeared in the doorway of Daniel's study. He sat slouched in his chair, a half-empty glass of scotch beside him. When he saw her, he started to rise, but she held the envelope up. I think you should see this, she said. He took it, his fingers trembling the instant he recognized the handwriting. The name on the front nearly stopped his heart. He opened it carefully. As he read, his face went blank, then pale. I don't understand, he whispered. She never told me. I didn't. His voice broke. Maria waited silently. Daniel looked up, eyes wide with disbelief, sorrow heavy in them. You're my sister, he said slowly, as if the words might dissolve if spoken too quickly. Maria nodded once. Half. But yes. Either of them spoke for a long time. There was no guide for moments like this. Just breath, just presence. The woman who had saved his son had turned out to be family all along, not by choice, not by design, but by blood. And for the first time, Daniel's walls didn't just crack. They fell. She didn't rush. She didn't command. Maria simply let the music breathe. And slowly, the 3 of them, Lucas in his chair, Maria at his left, Daniel at his right, began to move together. Arms linked. A trio that, by all logic, should never have found one another. Yet here they were. They swayed gently, rhythmically, as though guided by a pattern invisible to anyone else. Daniel's bare feet brushed the polished floor, awkward at first, then freer. Maria's touch guided without controlling, exactly as she always had. The ribbon sat forgotten on the table. It wasn't needed anymore. The bond was no longer symbol. It was alive, embodied, undeniable. Daniel looked down at his son. Lucas had started to hum again, a faint vibration that Maria echoed softly with her own voice. Daniel joined, not with words but with breath. One rhythm layered on another. No performance. No goals. Only presence. Maria lifted her eyes toward Daniel. Her face was unreadable, but open. He whispered the truth that had been growing inside him for weeks. You didn't find us by accident, he said. You were always part of the music. Maria didn't cry. Not then. But her hands tightened ever so slightly around theirs. A small confirmation. Yes. She heard it too. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't duty. It was healing, woven through pain, loss, and unlikely family. As they swayed, awkward, imperfect, but real, the music wasn't something they followed. It was something they had become. Months slipped by, though it felt like a lifetime had turned over. The penthouse, once sterile and still, now pulsed with signs of life. Music filled the rooms daily. Sometimes soft classical pieces, Other times bold Latin rhythms Maria had taught Lucas to hum. Daniel no longer walked in silence. Laughter echoed through hallways. Not always from Lucas, but from the therapists, volunteers, and children who now visited with careful steps and curious eyes. The penthouse wasn't just a home anymore. It was alive. It was a place of beginnings. At its heart was an idea, not born of ambition, but healing. The Stillness Center. Daniel and Maria had co-founded it as a program for children with disabilities, kids who struggled not only to speak, but to connect, to be seen. The goal wasn't speech. It was expression. Movement. Connection. Feeling. The very thing that had saved Lucas. The very thing that had transformed them. Not as CEO and cleaner. Not even as half-siblings. But as two people who had learned how to build from pain instead of hide behind it. On opening day, the penthouse looked different. The grand hallway, once a cold artery of silence, had been cleared and polished. Folding chairs lined the sides, filled with parents, doctors, skeptics, and wide-eyed children. The floor gleamed like something sacred. Daniel wore a plain button-down with sleeves rolled, more nervous than he had been in years. Maria stood beside him in soft flats and a sleeveless dress, her hands never straying far from Lucas, who sat in his chair, eyes bright with intensity. Lily stood quietly off to the side, pride brimming in her expression. The air hummed with anticipation. "You don't have to do anything," Maria whispered to Lucas, kneeling so her eyes met his. "You already did." Daniel knelt on the other side. "But if you want to, we're right here." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to. He placed both hands on the walker before him. He gripped it, paused, then rose. Slowly. Deliberately. The room froze. His first step was more shift than stride. The second steadier. By the third, the room held its collective breath. And then, at the marked spot, Lucas stopped, straightened his back, and bowed. Not clumsy. Not forced. Graceful. The applause erupted instantly, roaring and unrestrained. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel couldn't move. He just stared, stunned, his eyes filling as he watched his son stand in the place he thought he'd never stand again. And then, without prompting, Lucas reached to the side. He lifted the yellow ribbon, once their private symbol, and let it unfurl like a banner. Planting his feet, he spun once. A full, slow circle. Imperfect, shaky, but purposeful. The crowd leapt to their feet. Cheers. Tears. Gasps. A movement that wasn't just a step, it was a declaration. Daniel stepped forward, his hand trembling as he placed it firmly on Lucas's shoulder. Maria stood beside them, trembling from the weight of it all. Daniel leaned toward her and whispered words that only she was meant to hear. He's her son, too. Not metaphor. Not exaggeration. Truth. Maria didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. Her eyes shimmered, and one tear slid down her cheek. She nodded slowly. Her hand found Daniel's. For a fleeting second, they stood in a complete circle, Daniel, Maria, and Lucas, no longer divided by guilt, blood, or past. Just present. Just family. The applause thundered around them, but within it lived a quieter silence, not emptiness, but fulfillment. Then the music swelled again, richer this time. Rhythmic. Full. Not background. Invitation. Children clapped in time. A girl tapped her foot. A boy in leg braces raised both arms and copied Lucas's spin. One by one, it rippled outward. Parents joined in. Children followed. Hesitant movements blossomed into dancing. The hallway, once a corridor of grief, became a space of unfiltered joy. Daniel looked around, stunned. The penthouse no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to life. Maria caught his gaze. Without speaking, they stepped forward together. Slow. Synchronized. Echoing the very first dance she had once shared with Lucas. And in that moment, among ribbons, applause, and stumbling steps made holy, silence, once a prison, became a dance floor. If this story touched you, you're part of it now. Subscribe, share, and tell us in the comments what moments stayed with you most. Together, we'll keep telling stories that remind us of the quiet power of human connection.